Velez-Mitchell.
Welcome. We have an extraordinary show for you today. The trial now down to one defendant, Hsiung. I mean, we started with so many who were involved in the rescue of chickens and ducks way back in 2018 and 2019. And now we are down to this man, the last man standing, who faces the possibility of prison because a group who believe they have the right to rescue animals who are suffering in factory farms took some animals out, approximately 70 chickens and ducks. I want to go straight out to the courthouse live with Carla Cabral, who has been covering this case and has a member of the defense team spell it out for us. What's going on?
I'm Murray Holden. I'm volunteering with the defense team. What's going on today is the judge is ruling about which witnesses are going to be admissible, at least theoretically, once we get a jury and witnesses start testifying. Judge Laura Pasalia has ruled that some of our witnesses would offer testimony that is not relevant. For example, Almira Tanner, except under certain very limited circumstances, she's not going to be permitted to testify, but others will be permitted to testify, such as Alexandra Paul, Caroline Paul, Julianne Perry, and others.
So, first of all, I've never heard, and I've covered a lot of trials where the judge brings all the defense witnesses in advance and then makes them fly in from all over the place to decide whether she feels that it's okay for them to testify. That sounds really bizarre to me. Spell it out in people terms.
I couldn't agree more. In my 10 years as a lawyer, I've never seen it either. I think in part this is due to some discovery rules in California that are seeking what I'm going to call sort of radical transparency in terms of the defense and the prosecution not doing trial by ambush, giving each other a lot of preparation about what evidence is going to be presented and all of that stuff so that everybody can be prepared. But to this level, I've never seen anything like it. We're basically in some ways trying the case before we try the case. I think that these radical transparency laws, sure, they apply in all cases, but I think they hurt defendants. And I think we're seeing that in this case because essentially the prosecution is getting a total preview of what many of our witnesses are going to testify about, including our expert witness, Dr. Kirsten Rosenberg, and we are not getting the same bite at the apple for the state's witnesses.
And they're even allowed, the prosecution was allowed to cross-examine Dr. Rosenberg during that, right?
Yep. So essentially, the prosecution has been able to conduct discovery almost by asking questions, and then the prosecution will determine, hey, do we like that answer? Do we not like that answer? And that will affect what sorts of questions they ask our witnesses on the day of trial. So it's almost a dress rehearsal for the prosecution. I've never seen anything like this either. I wish I could explain it to you, Jane, but it's bizarre to us as well.
Well, it seems to me like injustice. I want to do a round robin if you can stand by. I mean, this seems like really outrageous to me. Donny Moss of TheirTurn.net.
I mean, it feels to me like the county is moving mountains to make an example out of Hsiung in order to prevent other advocates from coming into the county to follow up on reports of egregious animal cruelty in the many factory farms in Sonoma County. That's what this feels like to me. It feels like it's part of this effort to end DXE, really.
Well, the prosecution has been quoted, allegedly, I wasn't there, but people say they want to cut the head off the snake, was the quote from one of the prosecutors. There is, I think it's a speciesist comment, but there is the head of this whole open rescue movement. So it seems like now they've whittled down the number of defendants to just him, the lead person, in essence, of the open rescue movement, Priya, who was the co-defendant and also a co-founder, recently took a plea deal. Let's listen to that and then talk about that. She just recently took the plea deal.
I make the hardest decision of my life. I don't feel like I've made a more difficult decision than what I had to make yesterday.
With so much animal cruelty evidence excluded by the judge, Priya and her lawyers disagreed on strategies to move the case forward. So in the best interest of the animals, Priya took a plea deal.
I'm going to be here for Wayne and for the right to rescue for the rest of my life.
So what do you think of this panel? I mean, to me, it's so bizarre that they dropped the case against Cassie King. Prior to that, there were a huge number of people who went in and rescued 70 ducks and chickens way back in 2018, 2019. Now, as this case just drags on, it's finally in court. They haven't even gotten a jury selection. They forced the defense witnesses to come in and testify in advance, giving the prosecution a preview of the case. And Ellen Dent, then they decide some of them, even before they listen to them, are irrelevant and can't testify. I mean, this is like, and I want to point out one thing, the judge, and I just looked this up, is a former deputy district attorney in the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office, the very institution that is doing the prosecution. She used to work there, Ellen.
I'm not shocked, especially by what I've heard so far, especially with Carla's updates. I mean, it just sounds like they're completely against Wayne. It's completely transparent. I'm wondering if Wayne has been even offered any sort of deal at all. I'm not sure if he has, but it just seems like they're literally gunning for Wayne, for DXE. And I think if we did more digging, we might find out more about this judge, but that's absolutely not shocking to me.
Well, I think they all have, correct me if I'm wrong, out there in the field, they've all been offered plea deals and everybody except Wayne has accepted them. Wayne feels that this is the best way. He's a former constitutional law professor. He feels this is the very best way to make the case for open rescue. So I want to play a clip, but correct me if I'm wrong, about a positive development that has occurred, and we can talk about that.
Is this animal cruelty? In the Sonoma rescue trial, the prosecution has done everything they can to make sure that the jury never sees this footage. But yesterday, the judge granted a mistake of law motion in regards to 597E, an animal cruelty law in California. A similar motion helped lead to the historic acquittal of Alexandra Paul and Alicia Centurio in the Foster Farms trial earlier this year.
What that means is that if we had a good faith belief in the legality of our actions, partly as a result of this statute that gives you the right to give aid to animals who are denied food and water, we can make that argument to the jury. We can present evidence of that.
Our hope is that this will be a way we can introduce the evidence of animal cruelty and explain what led the defendants to take action on that day. But let Priya tell you herself about her state of mind regarding the cruelty occurring on those farms.
Ask us what we have seen. Ask the animals who are suffering. Just look at them. And you get your answer. Are they in a state of emergency? Hell yes, they're in a state of emergency.
So I want to go back before we get to our former Assistant District Attorney Nathan Semmel, back out to the attorneys and our reporter on the scene. This is a positive, right? That this so-called 597E is going to allow possibly some animal cruelty evidence for the jury to see. Spell it out for us.
It is absolutely a positive. I think to be clear, there are a couple of defenses, several defenses that we asked for. One of those is the defense of necessity, which is essentially if we have evidence that there is an emergency and that someone is being subjected to substantial bodily harm or evil, that you are prevented to do something that would otherwise be illegal in order to protect that person. The judge denied us that defense, finding, as judges often do, that animals are not someone, they are something. And so unfortunately, necessity is not available, and we are not allowed to use the necessity defense as a basis for our mistake of law defense. On the other hand, 597E, which is about animals being deprived of food and water for at least 12 hours. And if that's the case, then a person can take action with respect to those animals and have a defense to trespass. That we won't be able to use 597E as a defense on its own. but we can use a mistake of law defense related to 597E, which the essential argument here is we had reason to believe that animals were being deprived of food and water. We had legal opinions from experts explaining to us that under 597E, we were permitted to take action to assist those animals, and that's what we did. We had a reasonable, good faith belief. It actually doesn't even have to be reasonable. It just has to be a good faith belief. We had that belief, and therefore the specific intent prong, the specific intent element of the prosecution's case is negated. So that's what we'll be allowed to argue. It's going to be limited. It is unclear how much animal cruelty evidence the judge will let in. It's become very clear that she's not going to allow in animal cruelty evidence for its own sake, in order to prove animal cruelty evidence. She will only allow animal cruelty evidence in to the extent that it informed Wayne's state of mind, his intent in terms of what was happening on the dates of the action or prior to.
Very limited prior. If I can say, she's really been strict about the time frame. So any cruelty evidence, say from the 2014 Mercy for Animals, that will only be allowed in to say that Wayne got that farm on his radar because of that, but none of their conclusions, the necropsies that were done on the animals, are not to be allowed in because that happened after the fact.
Oh, wow. This is sort of head spinning. I want to play another clip that kind of also tries to explain a little bit of this. Witnesses in, some witnesses out, some witnesses everybody got dragged apparently before the judge and into court before the trial even began. Jury selection hasn't even started, and these witnesses had to fly in from all over so the judge could determine whether or not they were allowed to testify. I've never heard of such a thing, but let's just listen to another clip and try to sort this mess out.
We will be able to hear about the 2014 Mercy for Animals investigation at Reichart, but only as a way for Wayne to state this is how he first learned of the farm, not as a way to discuss animal welfare issues. The legal opinions of Professor Hadar Avram and former federal prosecutor Bonnie Clapper were ruled relevant as they pertain to Wayne's belief in 597E.
But Nathan Semmel, we'll get to it in a second, another witness, Dr. Armighty May, a veterinarian, was ruled irrelevant, and apparently she never even took the stand and tried to explain why she felt she was relevant. What are your thoughts on all of this? It seems like a court out of, well, I don't want to use the phrase kangaroo court, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I echo what Murray said earlier, which is how she's been doing this for a long time. I'm doing this for 20 years. I don't think I've ever seen before all of the defense witnesses being paraded into court to offer up what they plan to testify to and give the prosecution first a sneak peek at the evidence and also an opportunity to cross-examine and get prior statements on the record. So this is unusual. What I have seen.
But is it even legal? I mean, it gives the prosecution such an advantage because it basically gives the prosecution a preview of the defense case. I've also covered many trials, including some of the most famous trials: Casey Anthony, Jodi Arias, Michael Jackson, Robert Blake, O.J. Simpson. I've never heard of this. This is cray-cray, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a glass half full look at it, though. At some point in time, the judge is going to have to rule on these issues and the admissibility and the relevance of particular defense witnesses. So the glass half full view is that it's better to know it now, because if you plan on a particular defense and you learn at the 11th hour or immediately prior to their testimony that they are not going to be allowed to testify, it can be jolting. It also looks, you don't look smooth in front of a jury when that happens, and you start to, you can start to come undone a little bit. So there is an advantage to knowing it. What I think should have happened here is that, and what I've seen many times in the past on defenses where you're essentially admitting the conduct, but you're saying there's a legal justification, there's a legal basis for committing the act, is generally what happens is the attorney gets up and does what's called a proffer. And what proffer means is they say for the judge, if called, this witness is going to say X, Y, Z. And then the prosecution has an opportunity to argue, well, XYZ is not relevant to this case, and then you argue it. What I've never seen before, and what seems patently unfair, is the opportunity, like we have just said, to put the witnesses on the stand and get a free preview of their demeanor, of exactly what they're going to say, how they're going to respond to cross-examination. That's a first for me.
We've got some callers here. So let me ask, is Michael from Los Angeles still on?
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been following this trial pretty closely, but, correct me if I'm wrong, but I still haven't heard this judge's name. Is there any particular reason why why they're keeping that secret, or has it been, her name been mentioned? Because I haven't seen it at all. Thank you.
Well, you raise an extremely important point, and I want to bring in some photographs here. Okay, this is the judge, okay? And I'm going to remove this banner so we can see her name. Her name is Judge Laura Pasaglia. Like I said, she is a former prosecutor. She worked as a deputy DA in the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office. Those are the same people prosecuting right now. Now, here's, I think, something that reveals more about her than anything. She stopped this woman, who is a supporter of DXE and Wayne Hsiung, but is also a sketch artist, from sketching in a previous hearing, and literally took the photo, the sketch, away from her, and then said, you have to apply. So this woman applied, and the ruling is, and this is so shocking, that she can sketch. Remember, there's no cameras, there's no video at all, but this woman, who is a sketch artist, is not allowed to sketch the prosecutors, the witnesses, the judge, the court staff, the jurors, the bailiffs, or observers in the gallery. You are looking at the court order. This is another to me. I want to go out to Lindsey Baker. Lindsey, you've been watching this trial. You're a California voter, a California citizen. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, Jane, because this morning I was thinking about it, and I thought perhaps the reason the judge just didn't want her to show the sketches or wanted to see what they were was because of the expressions on the faces when they see the evidence, when they see the animals, the jury, even the prosecutor, even the judge. They can't help but react emotionally when they see this intense suffering. So that might have been the reason that she had decided that she did not want them sketching, and she made her go through this process. They're going to allow it, but only the defendant and the defendant's attorney. I mean, to me, it kind of tells a lot about what's going on in this case. They seem to be doing everything they can to hone in and block information, block empathy as much as they can, with even maybe not in the legal limit, maybe beyond the legal limits here.
I mean, I've never heard of this before. It seems crazy. I got to go back out to the field to Carla Cabral, our reporter on the scene, and also with somebody from the defense team. I'm just shocked. I'm just shocked. Is this America? That's what I started thinking when I heard that. Take it away.
I think for me, it's odd that the reasoning that the judge cited for not allowing the sketch artist to sketch her or the jurors or the prosecution is privacy interests, essentially. Right. And I think it's interesting that public servants, such as a judge, prosecutors, folks paid by Sonoma County tax dollars, who are in a public setting, in a courtroom that is open to the public, that there's an idea that those people have an expectation of privacy while performing their very public duties, such that photos or even sketches couldn't be taken. I find that, for lack of a stronger word, odd.
We've got another caller. We've got Nilofar in Dallas, Texas. Your question or thought for our panel about the open rescue trial and the shockers.
Hi. Last Wednesday, September 20th, The Atlantic published a strong article titled "Radical Vegans Are Trying to Change Your Diet." I quote a statement from the article: "Most movements fail. The number one outcome is failure, even in causes that are far easier lived." DXE has already won in Utah. They won in one of their cases in California. What are the chances that Wayne Hsiung is going to have a chance at winning in this very difficult trial?
I think that's, a really good question. Again, the prosecution was quoted as saying they want to cut the head off the snake, Donny Moss. And we know that Wayne Hsiung has gotten more attention than almost any other animal rights activist, as well as Direct Action Everywhere, in the New York Times, in the various publications. You just heard The Atlantic. He poses a real threat to animal agriculture. And so do you feel this is sort of an orchestrated effort by the powers that be, a judge who used to be a prosecutor, along with the prosecution, to try to silence this man who is breaking through?
Everything that we've seen so far would suggest that this is really almost a coordinated effort to shut down this organization and to shut down the person who is no longer at the helm, but has led the movement, the open rescue movement. So I think that Wayne has an uphill battle here. At the same time, we've been surprised twice before where we felt like the system was treating the defense unfairly. And in both cases, the prosecution and even the judges shot themselves in the foot by withholding information from the jury. And in both cases, the defendants won. And I think some of us were surprised by that. Many of us were surprised by that. So in response to the caller's question, I just don't think we know what the outcome will be.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Wayne has stunned the critics over and over again. He was tried in Utah and he won. And then he helped defend Alexandra Paul. And let's remind our viewers that all of these cases are caught on tape. In other words, the prosecution wants the evidence so they can show the crime. It's always upside down. DXE always records themselves doing whatever they're doing. This is the previous case, the previous right to rescue case with Alexandra Paul, the former Baywatch actress, as well as Alicia Santurio, rescuing sick chickens. And yes, we could say sick because they were all sick, it turns out, from a factory farm truck going into a slaughterhouse. So the fact that the prosecution always fights to keep the evidence out is why we're living in an upside down world. And remember, there are laws that are supposed to protect animals in California. One of the reasons that the activists went into these farms is that they had tried to report over and over again that what they perceived as, and we invite any representative from industry or any of the farms involved in this trial on, they perceived as extreme cruelty, and the prosecutors refused to prosecute. And that's why they ended up going in, because there's something called Prop 2 that went into effect in 2015 that provides certain protections for poultry. And they felt the law was not being upheld. So talk a little bit about that, Carla, and your guest.
Yeah, I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that Wayne is going to talk about Prop 2 today. And I think it's very telling, the charges that they chose, trespass and conspiracy to trespass, dropping the burglary, dropping the theft, because they saw that was ineffectual in the other cases. And it also allows them to keep out the animal cruelty evidence as much as they can keep out. I did find it also really interesting today when the prosecution, Wayne asked about who it was that they were alleging conspired with him because they were able to see all of our hands, who we're calling, but the judge ruled that we were not allowed to know who Wayne was supposed to have conspired with. I'd love to hear what you thought about that, what the legal ramifications of that are.
Yeah, it's honestly wild to me that we still don't know who these alleged co-conspirators are, because we should know to the extent that we're entitled to put on those people as witnesses to testify about their state of mind, because the prosecution is required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that those people came to some agreement, some meeting of their minds with Wayne's mind, and intended to commit a crime together that they knew was a crime. I don't think the prosecution is going to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, but I think the fact that we are not permitted to discover that information at this time, the fact that we're putting on testimony with all of our witnesses and the prosecution is not, is just evidence, not as if we needed more evidence of this, but evidence that we are working in a system that is not fair to criminal defendants. And I think that's true whether you're Wayne Hsiung or whether you're anyone else. But I agree that what's happening here is absolutely an attempt to take down direct action everywhere, to take down Wayne. And for me, that's actually it's an incredibly hopeful thing, because what this tells me is that open rescue works. What it tells me is that it's a powerful, powerful force in the animal rights movement, because the industry is afraid. Costco and Whole Foods and the American Humane Association are sending expensive, high-powered lawyers to California to argue about, not revealing any documents about animal cruelty to us, right? And I think open rescue works. The industry is afraid, and even if there is a guilty verdict in this case, we will lose forward. I think we've made a good record. There have been a lot of rulings in this case that I find confusing. I think we have some excellent grounds for appeal, and sometimes victories for social justice movements are won after you, quote, lose below, once you can appeal to a higher court. And so, of course, I'm hoping for an acquittal. I believe that we'll get an acquittal, but if we don't, the movement will lose forward.
Well, yeah, and I mean, who would pay the price? Wayne Hsiung going to prison. There's still felonies, is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, let's talk about the fact that we've whittled this all down to one defendant. Let's talk about the two others prior.
We might go to prison for trying to rescue criminally abused animals. And now the factory farm companies are trying to silence us. We've just been barred from talking to the media until the end of our case.
My name's Wayne Hsiung.
My name is Cassie King.
And my name is Priya Sahani.
We're facing conspiracy charges for allegedly interfering with a quote-unquote lawful business.
A core part of this case is exposing animal abuse. And now that we can't tell the media about it, it's more important than ever that you speak up.
In 2015, DXC investigators started exposing animal abuse at factory farms in Sonoma County, keeping hens in cages so small that they violated Proposition 2.
The Sonoma County DA refused to act, so we took action ourselves.
One of those hens, Libby, was so sick that she died that same night, and yet 40 of us were arrested and painted as criminals.
I explained to the police that the public has the right to intervene when animals are dying, but they wouldn't listen.
Dozens of police arrived in riot gear and 80 activists were arrested.
We could spend years in prison.
We are hoping that the jury will see that prosecuting people for rescuing animals is outrageous, and that we do have the right to rescue animals from abuse.
Stay tuned by following Direct Action Everywhere on Instagram and Sonoma Trial on Twitter.
Thanks for supporting the right to rescue.
Now, I want to go out to Michelle Celestino. Priya has dropped out on her own. In other words, she took a plea deal. Let's put it that way. But the other defendant, Cassie King, the prosecution decided on the eve of the start of the trial, we're going to let her go. Michelle Celestino, UnchainedTV host, you had some thoughts on that.
When I first heard that, the first thing that came to mind was it's a serious psychological strategic game by the prosecution. Cassie's white, and she's amiable, she's well-spoken, and she's also one of the leaders of DXC. And for them to drop all her charges, it looks better for the prosecution because now the defense's face are two minorities in a predominantly white, I would say, jury pool. And that only works for the prosecution. What gets to me is that we don't point out the inherent racism and the unconscious bias that is built into our judicial system and society. And I think it's something that we need to call out and also recognize that the prosecution is playing that psychological strategic game, and they're getting at them at all angles.
Wow. Well, again, Priya proactively took a plea deal, but you're absolutely correct. The one person they decided to drop all the charges against was Cassie King, who is a white defendant. Ellen Dent, let me ask you, what is your take on that? What do you perceive?
I'm wondering if they can bring up that Cassie did have her charges dropped, and why, if she was, having the same charges brought against her. So why haven't the charges been dropped against Priya? Why was she, why did she have to make a plea deal? And why is Wayne in the same situation where it's either a plea deal or going to trial? So I think that's a really relevant point that Michelle made. There is a lack of justice in our judicial system, especially when the jury of your peers may not actually be your peers.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think it's a very interesting point. Can it be brought up in court? I mean, I've heard opening statements and closing arguments where people construct entire fantasies. In the Casey Anthony case, an alternative theory with photos of how little Kaylee died was presented in opening statements. One of the reasons why they pulled the rug out from under the prosecutor, because they weren't really expecting it, I don't think. Why can't this theory be mentioned? Can it be mentioned? Nathan?
My guess is that the judge will instruct both sides that they're not to discuss what happened to any other person charged in the case. And generally the basis is that the facts aren't the same as to any two defendants. It could have a prejudicial effect, and that the jury is to determine guilt or innocence based upon just the facts and the evidence as it pertains to those people who are still remaining in the case. I haven't heard a decision on that, but I've seen many, many, many cases where a co-defendant or a co-conspirator pleads out, or a charge is dismissed at some point in the process, and we're always instructed that that can never be told to the jury.
Well, but this is a case like no other, Nathan. I mean, this case look, no cameras, no video, no still photos. And then the person who wants to sketch is not allowed to sketch the judge. Honestly, I have never heard of such a thing. Lindsey Baker, do you think that, it's becoming obvious they're out to get Wayne, but could his racial identity play a role in that? Do they think maybe that could work with the jury?
In the times we're living in right now, we see this huge divide between people that are accepting of all and those that want to, move away and just have their own group that they belong to, and they're basically racist. Let me say it. I think it's possible that they think this will go over better, as the other people on the panel have been saying, with the public, if they're only prosecuting someone of color, not necessarily the sweet blonde hair, blue-eyed girl, their niece or daughter or whoever they might identify with. I don't know. I mean, I hope not. The whole thing made me sick to my stomach. I mean, I watched all the videos that DXE has put out and how at every turn they block them. How can they have a defense of going into the slaughterhouse without showing the abuse? That destroys their defense. They're going in to rescue from abuse. Hello. I mean, I don't know.
I agree with you. I agree with you. If your defense is you went in there to rescue animals, the idea that they refuse to allow animals who were rescued or their medical condition to be shown, it just seems like inherently just biased toward the prosecution. I want to play a clip that is related to that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kirsten Rosenberg, and I was just admitted to testify as an expert witness.
But she can only speak about the footage from Sunrise Farms and Reichart that she reviewed to render her veterinary opinions. She cannot speak about the medical record for Libby, a hen rescued from Sunrise and brought to her for care who was so sick she died within hours.
So I invite any of the farms on anytime to comment, or any meat industry representatives. But that is the crux of the case, going back out to those who were there, Carla Cabral, and a member of the defense team who's not a direct. The reason we're talking to you is that you're not gagged, right? Everybody else is gagged. We can't really talk to them. Isn't that correct? But getting to this point, this woman is allowed to testify, but she saw one of the rescued hens die, like literally in her arms, and she can't mention that? That's crazy.
Any action or any knowledge that happened after Wayne trespassed or conspired to trespass is considered irrelevant by the judge. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So nothing is relevant and allowed to come into the court if it doesn't directly go to the state of mind that Wayne was in, the knowledge that Wayne had immediately prior to the action. So even information that was taken, videos that were taken more than about 24 hours out from the action, the judge is deeming irrelevant because the animals are supposedly looked at and culled every day. So it, to the court, is not relevant if there was something going on, say a week or 2 weeks or 1 year prior to the action, because the circumstances on the day of the action very well could have been different. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's fascinating to me that there's a finding in this case that the condition of the animals on the dates of the actions are not relevant to Wayne's intent or to any alleged co-conspirator's intent. This would be like if you were accused of burglary, the prosecution would have to show that you entered into this house, let's say, with the intent to steal something. And maybe your defense is, hey, I didn't intend to steal something. I heard my next door neighbor screaming, help me, I'm being stabbed. And so I ran in there to help a person who I thought was being stabbed. Whether or not, right, if you had a photo that showed that there was a person inside who had been stabbed, right, that seems like it would be very relevant evidence of your intent, even though it happened moments after you formed the intent for entering the house, right? It also seems like if it turns out there was no such person in the house who had been stabbed, that would be relevant evidence that the prosecution would be permitted to ask you about, and then it would be up to the jury to determine whether they think this defendant is credible, that they actually believed that that's what they heard, right? So the idea that evidence of what was actually happening in terms of animal cruelty on the day cannot be relevant to intent because it happened after the intent was designed in the mind of the defendant is wild to me.
Okay, this is like an upside down world. But let me just say this. I have hope because it looked pretty bad in Utah, where the prosecution was saying essentially, you stole property. Here's the prosecutor's closing argument in Utah that many of the jurors who spoke afterwards said turn them against the prosecution's case. He compares the animals to a dented can, I believe.
Analyze for just a moment the reasoning being demonstrated here tonight. I think it's clear that the pigs were stolen, they were taken, and they were not returned. In fact, Mr. Hsiung stated he didn't want to return. That's that. Imagine the use of the word rescue in some other context. Suppose you were in the grocery store and you saw a can with dents in it, and you thought to yourself, oh my goodness, that can has a dent. It has the potential of going bad. I better rescue that can, put it in my purse, take it out of the store. Or imagine you're at DQ, you see a dripping ice cream cone up there that the clerk just put on the counter. Oh dear, that cone is dripping off the side. I better take it so that it doesn't make a mess on the floor.
That, and I want to go to Donny Moss on this, that backfired so horribly because all the jurors said, basically, how dare you compare pigs who happen to be smarter than dogs, but that's not any reason why they should be rescued. I mean, you could use, intelligence arguments. Does that mean if a human being is in a coma, it's okay to kill them? Or if a human being is been hurt and is unconscious, it's okay to kill them because they're not conscious? No, intelligence isn't the criteria, but nonetheless, pigs are far more intelligent than dogs. And I have 2 dogs right here who are staring at me. But I mean, this idea of that the fundamental defense is that these animals are property and you can do with them what you will is at the very heart of this case, Donny.
Yeah, I mean, I do recall that moment where that the prosecutor really made that fatal flaw comparing a sentient animal to an inanimate object. But it wasn't only that got that, that hurt the prosecution. It was the prosecution's insistence that the crime itself not be shown. Right, as you may recall from that trial, the defendants were so eager to show the quote crime that they committed. Because that would take the jury inside of a factory farm where they could see the conditions in which these pigs were kept. And so it was probably a combination of both of those things that made the jury acquit the defendants in that case.
Yeah, and Nathan, do you think this could happen in this case too, where if they really limit the information, the jury's going to be like, what is it that you're not showing me?
Yeah, juries really don't like to be treated like children. And it's always apparent when there's evidence that's being withheld from them. And I think generally, because the burden is on the prosecution to prove their case, the prosecution suffers from those mistakes. And we've seen that to date. I do think they're making a little bit of the same mistake again. And I hope at least they've clearly tried to learn from their past mistakes in terms of their charging decisions. This case started originally as a burglary case, conspiracy to commit burglary. And as more and more people refused to take plea deals, they started to peel off some of the charges. They dismissed the burglary charge. They dismissed the conspiracy to commit burglary. There was also a grand larceny charge, which we saw in Utah and we saw in California. And when nobody was taking a plea deal, they dismissed those charges. The reason I think they did these things is to continue to try to keep out that evidence. And it's a mistake they continue to make because I think it will backfire on them. Murray said a smart thing earlier, which was, yes, if we lose, there's an appeal, and through an appellate process that could form the right to rescue. But
we've got a caller. I just want to jump in because we lose them if we don't go to them. Samantha in Pasadena, your question or thought for our panel.
Hi, Jane. Hi, everybody. Thank you for talking about this important litigation. I just have one question: is that now that since all the defendants are no longer they have been off the case, does that mean, except for Wayne, does that mean that people who rescue animals from factory farm, what does that mean for the future of right to rescue, or do we still have to wait until this case is closed? Thank you.
I think that's a good question. I think it was something like 80 people or 70 people were originally arrested. So it takes a lot of courage for all of these people. I have to go back out to the courthouse there. Carla, you are with DXC. There's a bunch of supporters there. Do you think that the people are looking at this going, well, I'll decide whether I'm going to go in and rescue an animal. I have to see what happens in this case. If Wayne gets sent to prison, maybe I won't do it. Or if he isn't, then I will.
Not at all. I mean, we are all here, obviously, to support Wayne, but even Wayne and all of us are really here to support the animals. And we all firmly believe in the right to rescue. And it doesn't matter in the end what happens today. We will continue forward. At one point after Priya took the deal, the judge looked at Wayne and said, "Mr. Hsiung, you now stand alone." And we all looked at each other because we thought, how could you possibly say that? The courtroom was packed with all of us. And we want to let the prosecutors know that they cannot cut the head off of the snake. As I said previously, we are a Medusa. There are so many of us out there, and unless they prosecute all of us and put all of us in jail, and by all of us, I mean thousands, if not tens of thousands of activists that are all over the world, all fighting to make sure that animals' lives are brought into the justice system, that they get rights as well. So we all are here, and we are all going to continue to move forward with the right to rescue until we've achieved total animal liberation, no matter what they do.
100%, 100%. And I think it's important to remember that cases like this, to me, and the support and the folks that come out, I mean, there's also a ballot initiative that's going on in Sonoma County to get it on the ballot for next year to ban factory farming. And Sonoma County folks are coming out in droves to sign this petition. Ordinary people who are not vegans, right? They don't want to see animals abused in this way. And I think it's important to remember, this just shows folks who want to abuse animals, make their money that way, and excuse that behavior. They are the few. We are the many.
We've got another caller. Paige, your question or thought for our panel.
Hi. Here's what I'm wondering. Do you believe that this case will set a precedent for the future, as well as will this go down in history? Back to you.
I'm going to answer that one. In my opinion, it will go down in history. Why? Because Wayne Hsiung is willing to go to prison. Okay. And, I remember sitting next to him once at an event, and I was like, you really don't want to go to prison. And he kind of brushed me off. I thought, he's being a little rude there. But you know what? He wasn't. He actually is less afraid of going to prison than I was afraid of him going to prison. And I grew to respect that. Michelle, you are a vegan, but you haven't really been that involved in the animal activism movement. You're a new member. But what are your thoughts as somebody who had really come at this from a health perspective, what you're seeing in terms of the level of courageous activism? Has it surprised you? And unmute.
It really has. It's incredible because I did become vegan for health reasons, and I'm learning, and I'm so inspired by everybody, and you feel everyone's heart. It's for the animals, it's for our health, it's for the planet. And the fact that Wayne Hsiung and Priya and Cassie were going to put their lives on the line to bring that attention to the animals and to what's going on in these factory farms is huge. I went to my first pig vigil, and it devastated me. And I finally made the connection. And I think that's what these trials do. The more they're publicized, the world should be covering this. Major media should be covering this, but they're not. We're covering this, thank goodness. And the more people know about this, the more everyone will get on board. Just me talking to my friends about it. They can't believe it. They think I'm ridiculous. And I'm like, this is really happening. And I'm talking to people who work in the news. So everyone's in denial. The more we talk about this, the more this is in the forefront, the more attention the world will see it. And these factory farms will cease to exist, hopefully.
And I want to take this opportunity to say, yes, having been in mainstream media for 38 years, and Michelle was a producer at the news station where I was an anchor. We were the only two vegans, and we reconnected. I say that because it is shameful that the mainstream media is not all over this case on a daily basis. Sure, they report victories at the end of a case, in articles, but this should be wall-to-wall coverage. The very fact that we have a judge, and I just got to go back to this because honestly, in all my years covering trials, this is a first in a bad way, that this judge is telling not only are there no cameras still or video allowed, but this woman who is a sketch artist has had one of her sketches ripped from her hand. And then when she sought to sketch again, the ruling says that she is not even permitted to sketch prosecutors, witnesses, the judge, court staff, jurors, bailiffs, observers in the gallery. Sure, it makes me say, is this America? Lindsey Baker, what are your thoughts on that?
I just think the whole thing is just showing us how this has backfired on them. And I think what they're trying to do now is damage control. I'm hoping, and this is a very optimistic kind of feeling, but I feel it. I think Wayne is going to be acquitted, or the case is going to be dismissed somehow. He's not going to go to jail. But at the same time, because if he does, the press is going to be much larger on it. If it's not mainstream media, it will be through social media, which puts a whole new slant on this whole thing. You have to remember, as time has passed, social media has become more and more powerful. So the head of the beast is not necessarily a person, but how that person or that movement can affect the public. And in this case, it could be through social media. So if he loses, I think this is going to explode in their face. And I think they know it, and they're trying to do damage control, and they're trying to, eventually they'll let him off, but they want to do it in a way that it doesn't get worse for them.
And I want to say, if you are upset that there's not a whole slew of TV cameras there covering this, which they cover many, many other trials, please support us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. You can download Unchained TV. We're free. You can do it on your phone, any phone. Just go to your app store. You can do it on any Samsung Smart TV. It's in the app store of Samsung TVs. And you can also do it on any TV with Amazon Fire Stick, Roku device, or Apple TV device. We've got one more caller here, and that is Joey in Alhambra. Your question or thought for our panel?
Hi, thanks so much for having me on, and I appreciate everything Unchained TV is doing to bring attention to this extremely important issue. And that actually kind of leads into my question, which is how can we get more mainstream media coverage on this, and why doesn't the mainstream media report more on this? Seems like a very important story, with respect to climate change, animal rights, and everything that's going on with the meat industry. How can we get more coverage on that?
Okay, well, let me just answer that since I'm the media expert here along with Michelle. The mainstream media, and I've been behind the curtain, I've worked at major news organizations, local, national, international, syndicated news, cable, broadcast. Look at the advertisers. The advertisers are primarily fast food and pharmaceuticals. So who has the most to lose if people start exposing horrific animal cruelty as part of factory farming? Obviously, the meat, dairy, and pharmaceutical industry, because the pharmaceutical industry relies on people eating meat to get high cholesterol, heart disease, cancer. Processed meat is officially cancer-causing, according to the World Health Organization. So the reason we started Unchained TV as a 501c3 nonprofit is to get this information out there and do an end run around the mainstream media blackout. I've often said, if you want to get mainstream media coverage, you've got to get naked, you've got to jump on a runway, or you've got to go to trial and risk your life. And now, even when you go to trial and risk your life, you don't get mainstream media coverage. And it's like a little blip at the end when the results are announced. And, GXC has done an incredible job to get independent media coverage from institutions like Vox and The Intercept and The Guardian, media organizations that are a little bit independent and not so beholden to the advertisers. But I'd love to hear what other people feel. Ellen Dent, what do you feel about the state of media, given that this is such a significant trial?
I think that mainstream media coverage usually doesn't want people to see. They don't want to see the truth, but people need to see the truth. And that's why myself and many other organizers with Animal Save Movement have stood outside of, a horrible, dark, stinky slaughterhouse for years, trying to give people the opportunity to come and see first person and inviting the media out. And, every once in a while they did come out, but it was usually because it was tied to another story that was trending at the time, or one outlet would cover it and then the rest would come. So I still hold on to faith that there will be an outlet that will, come and cover this, because of this coverage that you're doing on Unchained TV, and maybe it'll go further.
Well, yes. And what you're referring to is, for example, we tried to get people to cover the pig vigils down at Farmer John. And it was when Joaquin Phoenix won a huge global award and skipped the party and went there that they got the big coverage that they were looking for, because Joaquin Phoenix is a world famous celebrity. I want to say that we've been on Voice America Radio, which has 7 platforms like Spotify, iTunes, et cetera, for an hour. Thank you so much, Voice America Radio, for allowing us to have this important discussion. We're going to end Voice America, but stay live on Unchained TV, the streaming network, and all the social media, including Facebook, Twitter, now X, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc., for another half hour, because we do have a couple. We could talk about this all day. I mean, this is literally, I would expect this in maybe Russia. Okay, I would expect in Russia, where you say you can't sketch the judge. And, judge who imposed the gag order on the defense, we invite you on anytime, Judge Pasaglia, to comment on anything we've said. Okay, we invite you on anytime. But I do feel that there is some inherent unfairness. However, we felt that way in the other previous cases, and there was an acquittal. I want to play a clip of why those who are in favor of open rescue say they have a legal right to do this. And it's Alexandra Paul, also on trial in California. She was acquitted, but she explained that the authorities ignored their demands to look at these problems inside the factory farms in California, arguing that there's laws broken because California voters passed Prop 2, which requires certain conditions for poultry. And there has not been a single prosecution of a violation of Prop 2 since it went into effect in 2015, for years. So are we saying that miraculously all these farms suddenly changed their behavior and there hasn't been a single violation? No. What they're saying is the authorities refuse to prosecute violations of Prop 2 even when presented with evidence. Listen to her.
Chaos of the high slaughter speeds that workers are pressured to meet. Living birds sometimes get mistaken for dead ones and are thrown in the trash alive. I knew that this cruel fate was waiting for birds on that slaughter truck. I knew the conditions that they were raised in by foster farms left many of them intern, infected, and disabled. DXE had tried reporting these criminal conditions to the authorities, but we were ignored.
So we invite Foster Farms and any of the other companies that come up. She, again, was acquitted in that trial. And I want to play one other clip because it refers to what we were just talking about, how the truth is not getting out there. And one of the only ways in desperation that activists get the truth out is through criminal trials.
We also choose these animals because they tell best the story of what's going on behind these closed doors. And we document it and we share it with the world because nobody else is showing people what's going on. The only reason people know what's going on behind these closed doors is because of animal investigators.
So, Donny Moss, you're an activist based in New York. You've been covering animal abuse on that coast. Unfortunately, it's an international phenomenon with 80 billion farmed animals systematically tortured and killed for food yearly. Your thoughts on the big picture here?
Well, I actually went on an open rescue with two of the defendants in this role, former Priya, who's no longer a defendant, and Wayne, and went into a farm in California that was allegedly Prop 2 compliant. And it was hell on earth. You just, until you're actually in one of these places and you can smell the air and the toxic fumes and just sort of experience it so viscerally, you can't the images don't do enough, I guess is what I'm saying. And so the thought that the people who go in and document and rescue some of the, the victims who are in the worst shape, to think that they're somehow criminals being tried in a court and not the people who are committing the actual crimes. It is, as you said, Jane, it's like the whole world is upside down. How is that even possible? How is it possible that people who are doing this good work are regarded as potential criminals in the criminal justice system? There's no justice here. My hope is that, as Alexandra Paul pointed out in the testimony that she gave to that jury, that as more and more people learn the truth about what goes on behind closed doors, that they'll change their behavior and they'll realize that these places shouldn't exist in the first place, factory farms and slaughterhouses. I mean, ultimately, that's probably what led many people on this panel to change their own behavior, seeing videos just like the ones taken by undercover, or not undercover, by investigators, animal investigators at DXC.
So Wayne is defending himself. The final remaining defendant is defending himself. I want to show a clip of Wayne defending himself in the previous trial in Utah, because he is a very effective attorney. Again, he is a former constitutional law professor. Let's listen.
I wish I could tell you the full story of what happened. We were on very direct orders to talk only about United March 7th, 2017, only about two pickets. But it's an interesting thing hearing someone as compelling as Vaughn, and he's a very compelling speaker, talk about what's in your heart in a way that you know is not true. And it's not. And honestly, the best way to explain it is the way Rick explained it, that there's a big difference between stealing an animal and trying to help someone who needs some help. And I think at the end of this closing argument, we'll be convinced, hopefully, that that's all we're trying to do. But I did want to go back to where we started.
I mean, the authenticity there, the calmness. I mean, he is defending himself. He's on trial. Now, normally they say anybody who defends themselves has a fool for a client, but I think that there's an exception to that, Nathan, when it comes to Wayne Hsiung.
Yeah, I mean, you can draw a straight line between the failure of the media to cover these cases for the prosecution, the law enforcement not going after the true offenders and, enforcing Prop 2 and the like, prosecuting the people who are compassionate and simply just trying to save animals. The deck is stacked, really. And it takes somebody like a Wayne who has the oral capabilities and the passion to fight the fight. It's something that a lot of lawyers, there's tons of great lawyers out there, but they don't know the issues necessarily as well as Wayne and other, and others in DXC and others who are animal rights activists. And sometimes it takes that, it requires, a jury needs to hear those sort of impassioned pleas that a normal attorney might not be able to give. But it puts an incredible burden on Wayne and people similarly situated that really shouldn't be there. The deck should not be so stacked. Anybody should be able to defend these cases, but really what should be happening is the prosecution should be using its discretion and going after the offenders. And that's what's not happening. And that's really unfortunate.
It's interesting that the judge used to be a prosecutor in this office, the district attorney's office. So that's the very institution that failed to investigate when the activist said there are violations of law going on there. I want to go out to Carla. You're at the courthouse live. Tell us what happens next. I mean, we've reviewed the case, wild developments, from I don't know how many dozens of defendants to one defendant left now, who happens to be the leader of the open rescue movement. What a coincidence. What's going to happen in terms of jury selection? How long is this case going to take?
That's a great question. The jury selection, we believe, is only going to take a matter of a day or two, they're hoping. And then the judge had asked both sides if they felt that the trial would be able to be completed in 2 weeks from once the jury is selected. So that's what we're working with, 2 weeks from when we have a jury selected.
And I want to ask you, sorry, I had to get a glass of water. I want to ask you about the people who are testifying. Okay, so we've heard that, yeah, one vet can't, one vet can. I still can't wrap my head. People had to fly in. Like, they're saying that a former prosecutor, Bonnie Clapper, who is a famous former prosecutor, can testify. Did she have to fly in all the way from New York to make that determination or not?
No, Bonnie Clapper will be able to testify. So both Professor Hadar Avaram and Bonnie Clapper will be able to testify only in regards to how they formulated their opinions on 597E. That's what they'll be able to testify about.
Let me play a little clip and we're going to get back to that just so.
We will be able to hear about the 2014 Mercy for Animals investigation at Reichart, but only as a way for Wayne to state this is how he first learned of the farm, not as a way to discuss animal welfare issues. The legal opinions of Professor Hadar Avaram and former federal prosecutor Bonnie Clapper were ruled relevant as they pertain to Wayne's belief in 597E.
So, Cassie is there. Cassie, love to hear your thoughts. Cassie King is the very former defendant who the prosecution apparently regarded as a big threat, just suddenly decided on the eve of trial to drop all charges against you. First of all, why do you think they did that, Cassie?
Well, they didn't give any reason in court on the record, so it's hard to know because we're just speculating. But I think it's probably a combination of thinking that they would have a harder time convicting me, either because I'm not as present on the live streams or because they think I'd be more sympathetic to the jury, and wanting as many defendants, as many lawyers, and just as much of a headache to deal with, because this case has been dragging on for 5 years. The trial's already been dragging on for weeks, and we haven't even gotten to jury selection. I think it's a headache for everyone. You know, we're here for the animals, but it's a headache for everyone how complicated it is. The vast amount of exhibits and hours of live streams and hours of body cam footage and so much going on that maybe it was partly laziness and trying to simplify things. But I guess it didn't really work because the case has still been quite complicated, even though we now only have one defendant and one defense attorney, Wayne.
And you know, what's even more ironic is we're living in a society where people aren't even prosecuting crimes under $1,000 in many cases. There's, you know, a lot of, for example, shoplifting going on. We all know that, and they don't prosecute it. So your thoughts on that they've chosen to prosecute this?
I just think it's representative of the entire system, which is broken and corrupt and disappointing at every turn. The district attorney's office has so much power, and we're giving power to the wrong people in society. We're giving power to people who like law and order and like power and like doing things the way they've always been done and want to abuse that power. It's so unfair that they could hold these charges over me for 5 years and then just decide on a whim on the day that trial's starting that they're going to dismiss me from the case. But it's not surprising when you think about how they abuse their power against everybody caught in this legal system.
You're muted.
Sorry.
You're muted.
It happened to be right after they wrote an article. You wrote an article, an op-ed piece that was very well received, where you talked about, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were raised as a good Catholic girl and basically painted you as a real goody two-shoes. And it was right after that article came out that the charges against you were dropped. Do you think that that they read that and went, uh-oh, she's going to look like just a nice Catholic schoolgirl who's a goody two-shoes. We're going to drop it.
It's possible. About 60% of the religious community in Sonoma County is Catholic, so it's definitely the predominant religious faith. And I do think that would be one factor that makes me more relatable. Yeah, like I said, I think it's a lot of factors contributing to that decision. And it's not missed on any of us that they've whittled away, me, a young white woman, and they're trying to go after people of color. So, there's a lot of factors. Maybe it's partly ageism. Maybe it's partly that I'm Catholic and they don't think people will relate as much to a Chinese Buddhist or, someone from India. But this is the reality of how the system works. Again, I think it's representative of everything that goes on in the criminal justice system.
Michelle Celestino wants to know, can you sue them, Cassie?
I'm really not interested in doing that. We have legal cases to manage right now, and I don't want another one. But whether I could, maybe. It's possible, in theory.
What's the mood there? We've all been covering it, but I'm in Los Angeles. Most of the folks here are either in New York, LA, or I believe Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the case of Ellen Dent. What is the mood on the ground? All the other cases also look like, oh, this is bad. We're nervous. And then after the other victories in the case of the pigs that Wayne and Paul Picklesheimer were charged, and then also in the Alexandra Paul case. So what's the mood there?
Well, right now it's pretty good in this moment because we just had 6 more defense witnesses be admitted in the morning session. So, it's been dragged out, it's been slow, it's been kind of exhausting for everybody. But this morning, a lot just happened. We got several key witnesses for the defense approved to testify. And while they are limited to only speak to things that the judge thinks is relevant to what Wayne knew at the time and what his state of mind was, that actually allows us to get a lot of evidence in, because we have videographers who took footage at Sunrise Farms and Reichardt Duck Farm prior to these actions on that witness list. And we have people who were involved in organizing the actions and who were rescue leaders at these actions, able to speak about what they saw, what they heard, the facts that happened at the action. So not getting into how terrible the conditions were, not going on the path of how sick these animals were, but just basically what they saw, what they heard, what they saw Wayne doing, what they heard Wayne saying, what they heard police saying to Wayne about negotiations to go in and help the animals at Sunrise. So even though the animal welfare evidence is being severely restricted, as we've seen in our past trials, like you said, and then we still won despite the odds, there is some hope that these people who are brilliant, compassionate, wonderful, well-spoken, and very, very, very relevant people, whatever the judge might think, are going to get the chance to take the stand and to share what they knew at the time and what they shared with Wayne and what he knew at the time of these rescues.
Well, I want to clarify, because there's been kind of a constant theme here that the prosecution is going to stop the defense from showing the images of animals like on their backs, unable to turn around, hobbling, the disturbing images. Are you now saying because of these witnesses who are approved that opens the door for some of that crucial video? As they say, an image is worth 1,000 words. One look at it is worth, hours of discussion about what really goes on, as Donny Moss just said.
Yes, that's what we're saying, that we have a large amount of video footage. We have a lot of information that won't be allowed, but a sliver of it, it's looking like it will be allowed. Footage that was taken at Reichardt that was shared with Dr. Tristan Rosenberg to inform her veterinary opinion, and former federal prosecutor Bonnie Clapper to inform her legal opinion about what was happening there. And this is all because the judge did grant the mistake of law defense for Wayne, which means he can speak about having this mistaken belief that because of California Penal Code 597E that explicitly gives citizens the right to enter private property where animals are denied food and water, the legal right to trespass, what would otherwise be trespass, no longer is. And because he had this mistaken belief that this law does exactly what it says it's supposed to do, he's allowed to testify to his state of mind at the time and anything that he knows, anything he knew then that was relevant to animals being deprived of food and water. So yes, we think that Dr. Tristan Rosenberg will be able to testify about seeing this footage that Louis Bernier will lay the foundation for because they filmed it, and that the jury hopefully will get to see these ducks who are collapsed on their backs, paddling with bloody wings because they're thrashing them desperately against wire metal floor that they live on for their entire lives, even though ducks are semi-aquatic animals who need to be in the water but never get to be in the water at Reichardt. So yes, it does seem like some of this footage will come out.
And if I can just add in on that,
I just want to say, I'm starting to get a real good idea of why the prosecution dropped you. Go to law school when this is over. Okay, continue on, Carla.
I was just going to say that in the trial before the trial, so when Shearston was giving testimony and when all this was going on, a few of the video clips were already shown, and the judge was able to see the state of the ducks at Reichardt Duck Farm. And I'm telling you, I swear I saw in her a little bit of a change. I don't think she understood how severe things really were. And so even getting to see a small snippet, I believe, had an effect on the judge. And if that's the case, imagine what that's going to do for the jury.
Yeah, it was literally just seconds because she didn't even let us play the full videos, which are already short. She said you can only play enough of them for the prosecutor to see that it is the video you sent them to verify that you're showing the witness, Dr. Rosenberg, the right video. And even in 2-3 seconds of footage, already I think people were crying in our court support group.
Absolutely.
So of course we're the ones who are going to cry. But if we're crying, then you think the judge would at least be a little bit moved. So yeah, it was already very powerful.
Well, wait a second. I'm in shock again. I've been in shock so many times today. Is it possible, Nathan Semmel, that the judge hasn't seen the footage at the heart of this case? I mean, this happened in 2018 and 2019. They've been in court for a long time. Is it even possible that the first time the judge has seen the footage of these animals in distress is today, or was that today? Yeah, I mean, today. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, it doesn't surprise me that a judge might not see the actual trial evidence until right before the trial itself. You would think that in a case like this, where it's so relevant and there's been so much motion practice discussing the video evidence, that the judge would just, even out of curiosity's sake, say, let me take a look. It's pretty remarkable that that didn't happen, but it sounds like there's a real silver lining here, which is the judge has now seen it, possibly moved by it, but most importantly is allowing some of it to come in. And as we know, that's probably going to have a profound effect on jurors because we've seen trials in the most rural places in the United States where factory farms exist, and jurors have not been able to find people guilty of rescuing animals because nobody wants to see this. But also, in addition to the graphic nature and the truth of what's on those videos, the importance of those videos coming in, or even just small clippets, they lend immediate credibility to the testimony of witnesses. Witnesses, not just Wayne himself, but also witnesses like Dr. Shearston, Dr. Rosenberg, excuse me, and Bonnie Clapper. That, this is why I wrote the opinion that I did. This is why I gave the legal advice I did. Not because I have a heart for animals, but because I think the law, I'm on the right side of the law when I advise people that if you encounter animals in these conditions, you have a right to do something about it. And if you just have a person's testimony with no video evidence, especially in this day and age, it's not nearly as strong. So this sounds like a terrific development.
Well, as I think about it, I'm not shocked if indeed the judge has not seen the footage before. And I'll tell you why. There are people I have known, friends, for decades, including some relatives, who have still never seen any footage that I have tried to send them over the years. You're nodding your head, Lindsey Baker.
Yes, from personal experience, People don't want to look, and they won't look, and they will actually, I've had people get angry almost to the point of violence with me for showing them footage or asking them to look at a video or even just a quick photo. It's so jarring to everyone that looks at it. I don't care who you are. If you're not a psychopath, and I know I'm being extreme here, but you have, I mean, people that have any sort of heart, any sort of humanity in them will realize the suffering. I mean, you see the animals in dire need, suffering, thrashing around. It's just, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that will stay in the normal person's mind. And I think
you know
that's what they're
what?
worried about.
First of all, the judge has done a couple of rulings here, has let in some witnesses. So let's not judge the judge. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's give her a shot, because you know what? In the other case involving the piglets, the Operation Death Star case where Wayne was acquitted of taking out some piglets, the judge started out extremely prejudiced, and by the end of the case, he was referring to the piglets by name. Do you remember that, Carla? It was almost like he suddenly started talking like an animal activist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really incredible to see the transformation over the course of that trial, and I agree. It was lovely when he started using Lily and Lizzie's proper names, and like I said, I really feel like when the judge saw the footage, however brief, it did have an effect on her. And I will say that today she did seem a little bit more responsive to Wayne, because prior you could really feel this sort of disdain. She would make faces, and she's doing that a lot less. So I think we're winning her over as well in this case.
Let's hope. We're just about out of time. Again, you think that jury selection is going to start on Friday. It should be wrapped by Tuesday. Well, the way things are going, I wouldn't count on it. But it's maybe at some point next week, the actual opening statements will begin. This is a very significant case. Let's just do a round robin. Final thoughts from everyone. This has been a really, really fascinating and eye-opening discussion. And let's start with Donny Moss.
So I have two final thoughts. The first is that two of the callers asked about whether or not this trial could set some sort of legal precedent. And my understanding, and maybe Wayne could weigh in when he gives his final thought, is that a jury, an acquittal or a guilty verdict from a jury isn't going to establish precedent one way or another. The defendant would have to lose, and the case would have to be appealed, and it's at a higher level that case law is made. I might be wrong, but I feel like we didn't answer that question. And then my second and final closing thought is that what is it that the judge said? The judge said to Wayne, "You stand alone." And when I think Carla first said that, I thought, you stand alone and we're going to crush you. That's the way I heard it. But maybe after the judge has seen this footage and learns more, maybe by the end she'll be thinking, you stood alone, but now we stand with you, now that we know the truth. That's my fantasy.
Wow. Well, from your mouth to God's ear, as they say, which is another saying, let's see what happens. We can always be disappointed down the road. I'm optimistic by nature. Ellen Dent, your final thought.
I'm with Donny. I'm really optimistic. After hearing what Carla said and the additions from Cassie, that they will be able to see this footage. I mean, there's not anybody who has a heart that won't break when they see what happens to animals in these factory farming conditions. I know mine has over and over again, but I feel it's really important that people see the truth. And if they can't see the truth, they need to hear it. So I'm hoping that anybody who takes that witness stand is able to convey what they saw, what they smelled, what they heard, and really, convey the truth to the jury, no matter what, and the judge as well. It sounds like she may be softening up now that she's seen the truth, and I feel like that they should amend 597E to include the right to rescue. Not only is that his reason for going onto the farm, and all the other activists that also went onto those farms and saved lives, but it's also very important that we have it in writing that the right to rescue should be legally. It should be approved legally.
Fantastic. Lindsey Baker, your final thought.
I would just say that it's taken 5 years to bring this case to court, and I think that's a good example of how hard it will be for the prosecution, and they realize how hard it will be to convict someone that is, in this case, Wayne, so likable, so honest. You watch him and I start to well up because you can see in his heart that he's sincere. And now I remember the judge had said to the artist, this isn't a game, this isn't a joke. Maybe now if she does see the footage, she will be moved, and that I'm very optimistic. And 3's a charm, and that's what I'm going on. 3's a charm. 3.
I love it. All right. Nathan Semmel.
I know we can win by losing, but I got to be honest with you. I'm with Lindsey. I want to keep winning these cases. And, the prosecution has made, I think, decisions based on what they've seen happen in other trials. This case started as a burglary charge, and I think they thought better of it as people were not taking, plea deals. They reduced the charges, and I think, and I hope ultimately, they do the movement a huge service by reducing it to trespass, because I think in their minds, they think, well, we obviously have them on trespass. I mean, they're where they're not supposed to be. So we can finally get a conviction against these people. But you know what? I think some of the decisions, particularly 597E and the mistake of law, and I know how good these witnesses are going to be on the stand. And if the jury gets to look at even just a little bit of evidence, I think we got a real shot here again. And I think that we continue to win because other prosecutors, I think, are going to start to become a little gun shy. And they're going to say, we can't win on the serious charges, serious felony charges. We can't win on the sort of medium larceny charges. We can't even win on trespass. Maybe it's time we start taking a look at the real bad actors here and leave these good people alone. So I want to keep the good times rolling.
Oh, wow. Michelle Celestino, your final thought, unmute.
I'm jumping on that bandwagon. I am positive, especially after hearing everything today. I just feel that the jury that is to come will hopefully see the flaws, see the holes. They're getting part of the information, and maybe they will go and look and see the videos. I'm not sure if they're able to. There's no gag order on them where they can't look and realize that there's a huge part missing, and that we prevail, that the right to rescue becomes law eventually.
Yeah, and of course, the jurors are going to be instructed not to look at media. But as we know from many cases in the past, it's very hard to police that. I want to give the last word to Carla Cabral out there doing amazing work in the field, as they say, but at the courthouse. Thank you, bringing us amazing guests. We're very grateful.
My pleasure. And I'm going to keep my final thoughts very brief because I'm actually very excited to get back into the courtroom. They're starting right now. They're going to continue to talk about what witnesses are allowed to testify and what evidence is going to be allowed in. So I really want to get back in there. But I wanted to thank all of you. I completely agree with all of the sentiments. I think there is a chance. I do believe that we are going to rightfully be able to get evidence in that will show people the serious nature of what's happening on these factory farms. And they will understand that Wayne did have a very good faith belief that what he was doing was just and lawful. So thank you, Jane. Thank you, Unchained TV. Thank you, Voice America, for being here. Thank you, all of you on the panel. I love you guys tremendously, and I'm so grateful, and we can do this together.
All right. Well, we'll be back with more coverage. I know you got to run, so we are wrapping it up. I want to say, if you liked our coverage, all we ask is that you download Unchained TV. We are a 501c3 nonprofit providing this and 1,500 other videos of compassion, climate, and health is our theme. And we get the information out that the mainstream media is not reporting at all or reporting correctly. So it's totally free. You can download it on your phone, any app store. You can download it on any Samsung TV through the Smart TV's app store. And you can download it on any TV using an Amazon Fire Stick or an Apple TV device or a Roku device. You can also go to UnchainedTV.com and just visit it and sign up. Thank you so much for joining us for this live coverage. See you next time on Unchained TV. Thank you. Bye.